In New York, Dan Rather with more of our special coverage of the attack on America. Headlines of the hour. White House officials say there is, quote, credible evidence President Bush was an intended target of the terror attacks. Federal investigators have now identified many of the hijackers, they say. All took training in the U.S. to fly commercial aircraft. NATO has declared terror attacks against the U.S. will be considered attacks on all NATO nations. At Ground Zero in New York City, more damaged buildings crumble, hampering rescue efforts. Thousands still missing. Known confirmed dead, 55 in New York. The stock markets could reopen as soon as Friday. Now, other key developments of the day. Federal investigators are following up every lead in the hunt for those responsible for what President Bush calls acts of war. The U.S. military remains on high alert. The Navy has dispatched warships to New York waters to help with security and humanitarian operations. New York hospitals are still treating hundreds of victims. The heroes of this horror, hundreds of rescue workers, are risking their lives tonight in the rubble of the World Trade Towers, searching still for victims. New York's mayor today distributed pictures of flight recorders in the hope someone will find the recorders from the suicide planes. The FAA today did not reopen U.S. airspace, even on a limited basis. Regular air service remains banned indefinitely. And the U.S. and its allies vowed the terror attacks will not be allowed to disrupt the world economy. At first, the FAA ban on civilian aviation was to have been lifted at noon today Eastern Time. But as the day went on, it became increasingly clear that putting the nation's air transportation system back together again was going to be a much tougher proposition. Cynthia Bowers is at Chicago's O'Hare Airport.
The skies above one of the nation's busiest airports are eerily empty today. Some flights diverted yesterday were allowed to resume, but passengers arriving for newly scheduled flights were turned away, their planes grounded.
Well, we still are not leaving any passengers through.
But the building is still technically closed to everybody from the outside, so you have to leave.
If you want to know how tough it's going to be to get America fully flying again, you need look no further than Chicago's O'Hare, the hub of the nation's two largest airlines, both targeted in the attacks. Every day, more than 250,000 people move with their bags through concourse checkpoints. Any increase in security will only add to delays at an airport already notorious for them. And that's not the only problem.
Moving hundreds of airplanes to where they need to be, hundreds of crew members to where they need to be, and arranging where they're supposed to be at each given airport is going to be a grade school fire drill. It's going to be an absolute nightmare.
That's because yesterday morning, hundreds of planes were ordered to land at the first safe haven, no matter where that was. From Los Angeles to Green Bay, even Canada. Untangling this mess will take a lot longer than it took the government to clear the skies. According to the FAA, at 10 a.m. yesterday, just after the attack, 3,181 planes were in the air over America. Within 17 minutes, almost 1,000 of those had landed, and in just over an hour and a half, all of them were on the ground. An extraordinary feat of air traffic control that resulted in enormous disruptions at airports like O'Hare.
I guess I'll just have to sit here and see what happens.
This evening, Canada is reopening its airspace to release 240 diverted planes. But any of those flights bound for the U.S. will still require FAA clearance before they can get into this country. Stranded passengers here at home will also be allowed to get to their destinations, but the FAA has given no indication of when regular air travel will resume. Dan?
Cynthia Bowers in Chicago. When air travel does resume, travelers can expect to encounter far more stringent security measures than those they've been used to. Vince Gonzalez has more on past lapses and future safeguards.
The day before the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington, federal investigators fanned out across the country, examining the FAA's efforts to improve security at airport checkpoints. A review of government records reveals the checkpoints, generally manned by poorly trained, underpaid workers, are just one gaping hole in America's airport security system.
Our security is very, very sloppy. And it's not because the systems aren't there, it's because we don't use them. People aren't security aware.
CBS News has learned the two airlines involved in yesterday's terrorist attack have been repeatedly cited for security violations. In the last 6 months of 2000, American Airlines was fined more than $400,000 for 49 incidents. United Airlines was fined $356,000 for 38 incidents. Delta was even worse, more than $600,000. In July, the FAA proposed fining American an additional $99,000 for security violations at several airports, including Boston's Logan Airport, where 2 of yesterday's doomed flights originated. The American jet that crashed into the Pentagon took off from Dulles. As in many airports, security for that flight was contracted out to an outside company, in this case, Argon Bright Holdings. In May, the company was fined more than $1.5 million after investigators found they put poorly trained personnel at checkpoints in Philadelphia and even hired convicted drug dealers and kidnappers. Company officials refused to discuss the charges with CBS News. After a series of security breaches at Los Angeles International Airport, a reporter from KCBS TV went undercover in 1999.
Is security so loose that it's possible for a terrorist to get a weapon on an airplane? We found out it's not only possible, in some cases, it's easy.
Security staff failed to properly check passengers. A producer posing as a traveler in a wheelchair was pushed around metal detectors and not adequately inspected.
When a security checker misses an encapsulated pistol or some other test, you fire them. You don't retrain them. This is security. It's my life and yours.
Today, FAA officials told CBS News within the next few weeks they will take a much greater role in airport safety by directly regulating security companies, something they don't do now. Vince Gonzalez, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Energy Secretary Spencer Abraham warned today that the terror attacks do not justify gasoline price hikes reported across the country, and he urged consumers to report any gouging to officials. CBS's Bob McNamara tells us that many angry motorists paid more at the pump than they should have.
This Oklahoma City Texaco gave refunds today. Cash back to gouged customers after jacking up gas prices to $5 a gallon yesterday.
I got my money back, so I'm happy. I'm a little disappointed that they did it, though.
The station's owner said a supplier had led him to believe that fuel supplies would soon be scarce.
Well, a tragedy like this, we certainly don't want people to think that we're trying to make extra money.
Gas stations from Dallas to Detroit and Indianapolis in between had more lines than AT&T.
It seemed like I should get filled up if there's going to be a shortage for a few days.
Going up to $5, and that's going to kill a whole lot of people's pockets.
The rush hour was fueled by false rumors of gas shortages and refinery shutdowns. People were filling everything from small gas cans to not one, but a pair of 40-gallon tanks.
With everything the way it is, I think it's time to go ahead and fill them up.
Service stations are selling anywhere from 4 to 6 times their normal daily volume yesterday. The system is not designed to handle that level of consumption.
A rumor in Oklahoma would start a rush to the pump in Texas and Arkansas.
I'm the same guy griping about the people panicking, and here I am getting gas tonight and scared of what it's going to be like tomorrow.
A Houston station hiked prices 12 cents in about half an hour. Gas bought at $11.03 for $1.57, sold at $11.38 for $1.69.
No. We don't change the price.
The attendant didn't want to talk about it. A station in suburban Kansas City, with a price of $5 a gallon, had customers waiting to be gouged for no reason.
This is terrorism in another form. Making people afraid we're going to run out of gas, making people afraid they won't be able to get to work.
While this Indianapolis station was drained dry today, oil industry analysts say gas supplies nationwide are ample for this time of year, and production is up.
Calm down. If you've got half a tank of gas, try to get by another couple of days. The situation will improve greatly, and you'll be able to buy gas at much more normal prices.
With some exceptions, gas prices haven't changed since the terror attacks, and several states have promised to prosecute those who won't bring their prices back closer to earth. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Dallas.
As the anguish and the anger rise in many quarters over the attack on America, one minority group lives with the growing fear that it is becoming an all-too-easy scapegoat. Maureen Maher has the Arab-American perspective.
In Dallas, it's bullet holes and shattered windows from an overnight drive-by shooting at an Islamic center.
We're lucky nobody was here.
In Detroit, angry Americans threaten area businesses.
You all die of horrible diseases, horrible death.
Both clear signs that a backlash against the Arab American community has already begun. Today, as many of the 1 million Arab Americans follow the aftermath of Tuesday's tragedies, many are afraid.
We don't want to be blamed on it. We are all in it. We all suffering in it.
Across the country, mosques and Muslim schools are under tight security. From the Oklahoma City bombing to the attack on the Cole, in this country, acts of terrorism often extend the long arm of accusation across the entire Arab American community.
When bombing happened in Oklahoma, it wasn't Christian. You know, it was a certain individual that had a certain background, where with us, right away, it becomes a Muslim.
And that includes Christian Arabs like Mohammed Sayam.
You know, everybody looking at you as like maybe you are a suspect. But they don't know that we are citizens of America. We live here, we work here.
Today, as Muslims arrive for the call to prayer, in Dearborn, Michigan, where the largest portion of the Arab American population resides, community leaders are searching for ways to keep the peace. Until, as Osami Sablami, who publishes the Arab American News, says, the responsible party is found.
If Osama bin Laden had been proven that he is behind this atrocity, we would like our community, would like to be part of the armed forces, and I'm sure that there are Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in the armed forces, to go and get him and bring him to justice.
While the Arab community is outraged by scenes like this at this Islamic center behind me, late word today from the FBI that they are now looking to speak with another former suburban Dallas leader of another Islamic center does not bode well for Muslims anywhere across this country. The FBI says it is looking to speak with Mataz al-Halik. They do not say he is a suspect, only that they do want to question him in connection with yesterday's events. Dan?
Maureen Maher in Dallas. Joining us now from Washington is the Defense Secretary of the United States of America, Donald Rumsfeld. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time tonight. You've called this a new kind of war. What do you mean?
Well, you know, normally there is a capital and a defined nation and a people that engages in a conflict that we call war. In this instance, it is quite different. It is a very different kind of warfare. It is indeed an attack on a way of life, because the purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. And to terrorize is to deny people their freedom to go about their daily lives and to provide for their families and to travel. And that's something that we cannot stand for, is a fundamental attack on the way of life in our country.
You said this afternoon the task of defeating these enemies will fall to the men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces. Do you mean that the way it sounds, that we're on the cusp now of launching a military campaign?
No, what I would say is this, that the effort against terrorism is going to require a broadly based and sustained effort over a good period of time. It is not something that's easily done. Anyone looking at the attack today can see that it was well organized, well financed, and vicious. So I think that it's important to recognize that it will be an effort that will be over a sustained period of time and will bring into play the full range of government capabilities.
Any doubt in your mind that Osama bin Laden was behind this?
My interest is in seeing that terrorism in its broadest sense is dealt with, and that we are capable of defending ourselves against that attack on our way of life. And it certainly is a broad problem that goes beyond any one country or any one non-state entity such as that.
That would suggest, and I would ask whether you intended to suggest, that some of this attack may be tied to state-sponsored terrorism.
There's no question but that terrorism can be tied both to state terrorism and to non-state entities. We've experienced that. We've seen it across the globe.
Mr. Secretary, you spoke of critically of leakers of classified information. What was that about?
Well, Dan, it was this. With the end of the Cold War and a relaxation of tension in the world, there seems among the people who handle classified information to have a parallel relaxation. And it's terribly important for us to understand that for people who are authorized to deal with classified information all across the range of government, they have a responsibility to see that they do not provide that information to people who are not cleared for it in a way that would prevent us from being able to track down and deal with the people who perpetrated these crimes.
Are you talking about people in Congress who are briefed from time to time?
I'm talking about any human being who has access to classified information and proceeds to violate federal criminal law and put the men and women in uniform at risk of their lives because of their willfulness or their carelessness.
Mr. Secretary, what can you tell us about the death toll and the numbers of people wounded from the attack on the Pentagon?
Well, the President was here today to express his appreciation to all the firemen and the policemen and the FBI and the teams from all over Virginia and Maryland, and for the wonderful work they're doing just outside of this building. The casualty count is continuing. The roster counts are continuing. The number, I am reasonably confident at this stage, will be considerably less than the figure that's been widely reported in the press of some 800 people. Exactly what number it will be remains to be seen, and I think it's not really fair to the families and friends and colleagues of the victims to be speculating about a number at this stage.
Secretary Rumsfeld, when will we know? When will we have a more or less final death and wounded toll?
Well, just outside this wall, they are in the process of trying to clear away the center section where the aircraft impacted and then went through 3 of the so-called rings of the Pentagon, filled with jet fuel, spewing it everywhere and burning the entire section to the point that it collapsed. They need to remove all that. How long that will take, I don't know. It's a dangerous effort. They're in the process of removing bodies as they find them, and it is very sad and difficult work and dangerous work.
Mr. Secretary, what impact will these terror attacks have on financing of our military?
I really haven't thought about that. There is no question but that a broad, sustained effort against terrorism is something that is not done cheaply, and funds will be required.
Mr. Secretary, you were a fighter pilot in the U.S. Navy, flew off carrier decks. You were a defense secretary once before. Did you ever think that you would live to see the day that someone could knock this kind of hole and kill this many people at the heart of our Defense Department?
No, indeed. The last time I was here, there were people who would throw things at the building during the Vietnam War, dig graves, and try to destroy computers and that type of thing. But it is unimaginable to be sitting in your office and feel the entire building shake and then walk out there 3 minutes after the impact and see the devastation and the parts of airplanes spread for hundreds of feet all across the side of the building is an appalling situation.
And you never thought you'd live to see the day?
No, indeed.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, thank you.
Thank you.
The full breadth of the American continent is not enough to insulate people from the fear that these terror attacks on the East Coast have triggered. Bill Whitaker, now in Los Angeles, has the West Coast story. Bill?
Dan, this was a day when people in the American West tried to get back to normal. Schools and tourist attractions reopened, but for the most part, getting back to normal just wasn't possible.
Why can we not go home?
CBS News has learned the border near San Diego, the busiest crossing in the world, closed down for hours last night after a man described as having a Middle Eastern accent called saying a bomb was about to go off. Across the border, 35 Iraqis were arrested in a Tijuana hotel. Not terrorists, as first reported in Mexico, just immigrants hoping to enter the U.S. illegally. The blast in New York sent shockwaves across the country. In Salt Lake City, shaken Olympic organizers are rethinking security for next year's Winter Games.
It does make us sit back and think, okay, now is a plan, can we really do what the plan says it can do?
Los Angeles, where people boast of living on the cutting edge, today was just edgy. Again, downtown, there were more cops than office workers. At the federal building, FBI agents checked everything and everybody, even the mail. Schools tried to get back to normal, but it's just too early.
If that happened, who knows if it could happen again. This is the United States, and it kind of seemed like a movie that was happening. It didn't seem real.
They tried to get back to normal in San Diego, too, but normal today is downtown checkpoints and frightened workers.
It just doesn't feel appropriate. It just doesn't feel as if we should be doing this, you know.
In fact, with airports closed, travel was far from normal. East to west Amtrak trains are booked solid. At the port of Los Angeles, federal agents are stopping and inspecting every cargo ship before it enters. The Armageddon-like scenes inflame the passions of some and retaught painful lessons to others, like visitors to the Arizona Memorial at Pearl Harbor.
I felt like Pearl Harbor was our message to be careful, to be vigilant, and that was the lesson we learned, is that you can never let your guard down, no matter how certain we feel we're in control.
In control is not what most people here are feeling. In fact, it's just the opposite. It'll take a lot more time and a lot more trying before any sense of normalcy can return. Dan?
Live in Los Angeles, Bill Whitaker. Thanks. Among the many questions about the coordinated attack on America, how did U.S. intelligence fail to find out about it and stop it? CBS's Eric Ingberg has been looking into this.
Reports are that most every ship in the harbor has been hit.
60 years ago, the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor became the uncontested model for a U.S. government, tragically asleep at the switch. Now, as the smoke settles over a new day of infamy, questions are hardening over why officials failed to detect any aspect of what was obviously a carefully planned attack. The total U.S. intelligence budget is classified, but it's generally believed to exceed $30 billion. Much of that goes to high-tech surveillance equipment like satellites for taking photographs and detecting missile launches, and radio interception equipment that enables U.S. experts to listen in on foreign communications. This technical spying, experts say, works when the target is a country like the old Soviet Union or China, but is less effective at penetrating terrorist groups.
Human intelligence, spies, is really about the only way you're going to learn something about these terrorist groups. They don't lend themselves to picking up intelligence with satellites.
Groups like Osama bin Laden's are small and largely filled by people who know each other. Hard to track, even harder to penetrate. Their phone calls and computer messages may be picked out of the air by the antennas of the super-secret National Security Agency. But that doesn't mean the U.S. will immediately understand a threat.
You're talking about millions and millions of communications and a handful of linguists. You have to intercept that communication. Sometimes it sits in recorders on tape for days before it's actually even listened to. The problem is you may pick up the right communications, a key signal indicating that a terrorist incident is going to happen, but because of the few people you have working on it, it may take a week before you ever get to it.
And one of the tasks now underway behind the high walls of the NSA is what's known in the spy business as retrospective analysis, sorting through all the electronic intercepts of recent months, looking for mentions of words like Boston, 757, World Trade Center, words we now know had a deadly significance. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
Making the rounds now is a chilling story about Ramzi Youssef, a protege of Osama bin Laden, convicted of masterminding the previous attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. 6 years ago, Youssef was being delivered by helicopter to New York for trial. As Newsweek magazine reports it, as they flew over Lower Manhattan, an FBI agent pointed to the Twin Towers and said, "See, you didn't get them all, after all." Youssef looked down and said, "Not yet." With the World Trade Center towers now in ruins and possibly thousands of people still in those ruins, it's not a good sign that so few survivors have been found today. CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon has the latest on the casualties and the ER doctors waiting to treat them. Elizabeth?
Well, Dan, with the additional building collapse earlier this afternoon, officials here at St. Vincent's Hospital remain on high alert for a new round of injuries and casualties. But for the most part, this has been a fairly frustrating day for the medical workers in the New York City area as the extent of damage becomes clear. But overall, the number of injured and people who could be treated and helped remained relatively low, and most of those were rescue crews.
All through the night, the ambulances came, ferrying the wounded from the hell that is Lower Manhattan to area hospitals and triage sites where emergency workers catalog the injuries.
What they're treating right now mostly is eye debris, respiratory debris, things that are causing problems to the rescues who are working, but nothing life-threatening that we saw.
But by morning, many stretchers and wheelchairs remained unused. Doctors and nurses stood by empty-handed. Some even left hospitals to volunteer in the field, bracing themselves for what they might see.
Do you feel emotionally equipped to deal with what you might see?
Not at all. Not by any stretch of the imagination.
As the day wore on, there was a growing sense of dread that survivors would be few.
Since yesterday afternoon or evening until now, most of what we've seen have been, in fact, the rescue effort workers and not necessarily the primary victims who were already in the building.
Doctors from around the country are calling in to volunteer.
I literally have hundreds of requests of physicians all over the country to come in and try to help.
At St. Vincent's Hospital, 426 people were treated by late afternoon, the majority rescue workers suffering respiratory problems from inhaling the thick ash and dust blanketing the destruction. Others suffered cut and battered hands from trying to dig people out with their fingers. Fire Lieutenant Robert Pesci was hit by falling debris and now has broken ribs. But he has bigger concerns.
I have personal friends that are missing. My old company, my old company where I used to work, the whole company's missing.
And Dan, that remains one of the biggest concerns for healthcare workers tonight, that those in greatest need of help may in fact not even have surfaced yet. And as the hours and minutes tick by, the likelihood that they ever will gets slimmer. Dan?
Elizabeth Caledon reporting live from St. Vincent's Hospital in downtown Manhattan. The rescue effort in downtown Manhattan involves more than medical help. It is also a rescue effort by sea, as Lee Cowan reports. Lee?
Well, Dan, ask anybody down here. It has been 2 days of getting by with very little. But today, some urgently needed supplies as well as medical care that couldn't get in by land did end up arriving by sea.
The waters that make Manhattan an island are now the waters that connect it with help from across the country.
How many trips are you going to be making back and forth today?
As many as we need to.
All night long?
As many as we need to.
So with the city streets clogged, blocked by debris, the fastest way for rescuers to get to the scene is sometimes by boat. Within hours, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world had suddenly become a lifeline, with every type of boat imaginable making the crossing from New Jersey to Manhattan. On board, water, clothes, food, medicine, all accompanied by a healthy dose of fear.
I have no idea what to expect right now.
For Joe Iacovone, it was a matter of pitching in. For the Coast Guard, it was a matter of duty.
So how many trips have you guys made?
Numerous, uncountable, sir. It's been nonstop.
In the moments after the attack, the Coast Guard took control of the harbor, clearing the way for a steady stream of boats, filled with willing hearts, now able to lend a hand. Zelda Schuster is a registered nurse, today volunteering to head back into a place she knows well.
I took care of the men that died while those buildings were going up. I'm just outraged. I'm absolutely outraged.
Outraged that today turned to an outpouring of kindness.
The Coast Guard has been working 9-hour shifts. The private boats have been essentially working around the clock, and there is no indication tonight that that help is going to end anytime soon. Dan.
Lee Cowan, thank you. A reminder now for those of you with access to the internet, you can get the very latest developments 24/7 by clicking on our CBS News website at cbs.com. You're watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Dan Rather with a special edition of the CBS Evening News, continuing coverage of the attack on America and the late developments. Here are the headlines. Secondary building collapses raised huge new clouds of smoke and dust tonight in the battered and still dangerous financial district of Lower Manhattan. Investigators say up to 24 knife-wielding terrorists hijacked the 4 jetliners used in yesterday's suicide attacks, and at least some of those skyjackers learned to fly in the United States. Officials say there's now credible evidence the hijackers of the plane that hit the Pentagon originally meant to destroy the White House but turned away, reason unknown. And the official death toll in the World Trade Center attacks, not counting those on the hijacked jets, is now a confirmed 55. But thousands are still missing. Now, some of the other developments of today. Rescue teams are working round the clock in the rubble of the World Trade Towers, risking their lives, trying to find victims of the disaster. President Bush said the attacks were not just acts of terror, they were acts of war, a war he vowed we will win. New polls indicate there's widespread American public support for retaliation. Congress reconvened today in a public show of unity to condemn the attack on the United States. Air travel was grounded for a second day as airlines prepared to resume some flying under strict new security. The U.S. financial markets were closed again, but the United States and our allies vowed that these acts of terror will not destabilize the world economy. Federal investigators are following hundreds of leads tonight to try to find out who was behind the attacks and bring them to justice. The attack on the Twin Towers sent shockwaves rolling across Europe. Expressions of sympathy for the victims was mixed with fear of where the next target could be. CBS's Richard Roth has the story.
Family out the front now, ladies and gents, please.
Europe's feeling edgy. A security alert briefly cleared the courtyard at the Prime Minister's office in London, and 1,000 extra police were on the streets of the capital. The British called it just a precaution. But newspapers on the continent were calling it a world afraid as the shock was seeping in.
Yesterday was indeed a dark day.
Pope John Paul spoke of unspeakable sorrow to the pilgrims in St. Peter's Square. And in London, the Prime Minister told the press there's an urgent new issue at the top of the world agenda: terrorism.
Where these groups are, how they operate, how they are financed, how they are supported, and how they are stopped.
Roadblocks and random searches now are slowing traffic outside airports, and security inside is slowing the tide of travelers, except for American travelers headed home, who were not just delayed, but stranded by the cancellation of flights to the U.S.
We've been here since 3:30 yesterday afternoon, and we were taken off the plane.
Security's been stepped up, too, at military bases, and where American GIs are stationed in Europe, some were frustrated by what's starting to feel like a new world disorder.
We're powerless. I mean, everybody in the States, we got an email today saying, put your American flags up. What can we do? I mean, we can't do anything, because if we do, we're a target.
A police escort led the U.S. ambassador to work here, a battle-ready Marine on the embassy roof. There's tension over feeling safe and at the same time feeling sorry. A memorial service for Americans tonight at a church in London underlined the worry the world seems to have, an uncertainty about the future.
It was a little bit isolating. I really felt like I wanted to be with other people who were going to understand.
At the American Embassy, Prince Charles delivered condolences from the royal family. There's abundant sympathy and symbols of grief for America's tragedy, but it's still impossible here to comprehend its scale or what may be its consequence. Richard Roth, CBS News, London.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has condemned the attacks in New York and Washington as a, and I quote, blatant challenge to humanity. But Moscow may provide the U.S. with something more concrete than condolences, as we hear now from CBS's Elizabeth Palmer.
All day long outside the American embassy, the mound of flowers grew as Russians came to pay their respects and express their grief. We are with you, America, the messages say. We offer our support. President Vladimir Putin has ordered a minute of silence Thursday to honor the victims of this week's attacks. But experts here say that Russia may also be offering intelligence information and even military backup if Osama bin Laden is responsible and the U.S. decides on reprisals in Afghanistan. Although Russia doesn't share a border with Afghanistan, its troops are already stationed in the former Soviet Republic of Tajikistan. These bases could provide valuable information and logistical support for an American retaliatory strike on Afghan soil. When asked about this level of cooperation, the American ambassador to Russia was non-committal.
Well, I don't think I would want to speculate about any kinds of response options or what we might or might not do with other countries. But certainly, we've already had the issue of counterterrorism on our agenda.
But the Russians probably know better than anyone that a mixture of rugged terrain and fierce fighters make Afghanistan a dangerous place to attack. 10 years of bloody war between Soviet soldiers and Afghan guerrillas in the 1980s resulted in 15,000 Soviet dead and a humiliating defeat. Grigory Bondarevsky was an advisor to the Soviet army during that war.
During the 19th century, the British waged 2 bloody wars against Afghanistan and lost. In 1919, 20th century, they lost 3 times. Now we waged a war, we lost. So the situation is extremely difficult.
Even if America does decide on retaliation in Afghanistan, it's sure to have serious reservations about substantial Russian help. But the very fact that such cooperation is even remotely possible shows that for the first time in a long time, Russia and America believe they face a common enemy. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, Moscow.
Let me show you something and take you somewhere. Take you to Lower Manhattan tonight. This is a live picture of the scene, eerie, as night falls. In the center of your picture, stream from a fire hose, still trying to put out fires down there, still choking smoke and smog and the leftover from debris. Keep in mind, at least portions, if not complete, 4 buildings collapsed in the last 3 or 4 hours, and a 5th building was reported wobbling. Still, brave firemen, policemen, and other rescue and relief workers are digging. They will be digging this night and many nights still to come. In Washington, Congress convened today under tight security and a rare show of unity. Our CBS News chief Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer has a report for you on that. Good evening, Bob.
How are you, Dan? I want to tell you, Dan, people here were really shaken yesterday when this Capitol behind me was evacuated. It was because police told the people inside that a plane like the one that had hit the Twin Towers might be headed this way. That didn't happen, but you don't forget a day like that. A lone man playing the national anthem on a trumpet only added to the eeriness that greeted elected officials and their aides as they returned to work today. And the extraordinary new security precautions were a reminder, if one was needed, that the danger has not yet passed. Whatever the terrorist objectives, it was soon clear that what they had accomplished is this. They had unified a Congress that until yesterday had agreed on virtually nothing.
This is war. And we will do everything in our power together to make sure that terrorists never, ever again can create this mayhem, this chaos, this violence against our people and our country.
Whatever we call it, we must put ourselves at a war footing. We must make up our minds we're going to fight this scourge of the world.
Torricelli of New Jersey said it is not enough to track down the individual terrorists.
The organizations themselves must be eliminated so that this can never happen again.
The aim, said McCain of Arizona, must be to break the back of terrorism.
I say to our enemies, we are coming. God may show you mercy. We will not.
Miller of Georgia called for an attack on the country of Afghanistan because it has reportedly harbored terrorists for years.
I say bomb the hell out of them. If there's collateral damage, so be it. they certainly found our American civilians to be expendable.
At this point, no one else here has been willing to go that far, but there is a consensus building that when we find out exactly who did this, there has to be a payback, and it may not be delicate. Dan.
Bob Schieffer, reporting live from Capitol Hill. It was not business as usual in the nation's capital today, and as Cheryl Atkinson reports, that included government business and the tourist business.
Today, the shell-shocked nation's capital
All right, have a great day.
struggled to return to normalcy under conditions that were anything but.
It is truly hideous.
The usual political graffiti replaced by an anonymous message of sympathy.
Don't even know what to think at this point. It's so unbelievable. It's so surreal.
There was no morning rush hour, no school. Many businesses were closed. And there was an extraordinary police presence.
And not just Washington, D.C. police, but military police, National Guard soldiers with their Humvees parked along the streets. It's a sight more commonly seen in other countries, but almost unheard of in the United States.
It is strange riding my bike down M Street and seeing military police and, National Reserve on corners and Hummers.
Yet there was an amazing sense of resolve on the streets, too. Federal employees who came to work today felt like they made an important statement.
I felt like this is my part as an American to show that I'm not afraid to return to my life as normal.
By coming to work and having things up and running, giving a message that, hey, we're not going to shut down because something like this did happen.
Even tourists voiced the same determination. These Milwaukee couples resumed sightseeing after their harrowing evacuation from the Capitol yesterday.
We can't let them know that it's fear, because we can't be run by fear. And so that's why we're here.
And if tourists did stick around, they got uncanny access to some of the best sites. Tanya Vollmer and her friend even got a tour of the White House this morning.
And then we just want to see if the city is still closed, and everything was open and you can go everywhere. We can go in the White House, and we never thought that it would be possible.
And that's the collective message from the nation's capital. We did not close up shop today.
Things will get back to normal. Security might be tighter at airports and things, but I think we have the spirit to go on.
Cheryl Atkinson, CBS News, Washington.
The cowardly attacks without warning against innocent civilians left Americans stunned. Now the shock is turning to anger and determination. CBS News correspondent Richard Schlesinger has more tonight about what your neighbors are saying. Richard?
Dan, the first numbers measuring the level of American rage are startling. CBS News started calling people around the country last night when pictures of the attacks and the aftermath were fresh and emotions were raw. The portrait those numbers paint of American resolve shows a nation that is united in its fury and looking for a target. Fifth Avenue, New York City, 24 hours after the attack. It was as peaceful as a Sunday morning. But this is midweek in Midtown. This is what the attack has done to this city. Virtually empty streets, a police presence so huge they had to use cadets from the police academy, and just offshore, an aircraft carrier, ready for anything. There is now evidence that since the attack, the nation is ready for anything. According to our CBS News poll, 57% of the people questioned around the country believe the U.S. will go to war. And an overwhelming majority of Americans agree with this man.
I've talked to friends who are Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and I can't believe the consensus of everybody. Retaliation is the #1 thing that we must do.
And there's evidence that the nation's anger is stronger than it's been in years. 66% of Americans surveyed last night support retaliating, even if innocent civilians are killed.
It's just such a heinous crime that whatever retaliation is necessary, I actually support.
Only 20% said they would not support retaliation if innocent civilians are killed.
Obviously, we're going to have to take very strong measures. It's terrifying to think what they're going to be and what they're going to cost.
Whatever the president needs of me, I'm prepared to do. Show me the line and I'll be in it.
Surprisingly, in the wake of the worst terrorist attack on this country in history, a majority of Americans feel safe where they live. Only 43% of those polled said they're concerned about terrorist attacks in their communities. 56% said they are not. People in the West and in rural areas feel safer.
I don't think that it could happen here. I don't think so.
A majority of the people polled said they believe when it comes right down to it, there's just not enough security to guard against terrorism in the U.S. And some of the anger in the country is directed at the U.S. government. By more than 2 to 1, the people we polled said the same thing some Americans said after Pearl Harbor. Intelligence agencies should have known about the attacks in advance. And the majority of people in the polls said there is not enough security guarding against terrorism in this country. Dan.
Richard Schlesinger, thanks. We're beginning to learn more about the passengers aboard the 4 doomed hijacked airliners, learning about them in some cases from their own last desperate cell phone calls to loved ones. Jerry Bowen in Los Angeles has been compiling their stories.
They were among the very first victims of Tuesday's terror. Businessman Tim Ward heading home to Southern California, his mother in grief tonight.
Just pray for healing for everybody. That's all I can ask.
David Angel, producer of TV's Frasier, and his wife Lynn coming back for the Emmy Awards. All passengers on American Airlines Flight 11, the jet-turned-missile that hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Tom McGinnis was co-pilot, a Navy veteran from Miramar's Top Gun flight school.
He was chivalrous and showed the kind of compassion for everyone that you don't really see much these days.
It was United Flight 175 that sliced into the South Tower, an image burned into the mind's eye of anyone who saw it. 22-year-old Lisa Frost, first in her class at Boston University, was aboard, headed to the West Coast, and a new job, said her father.
My wife and I are just missing our daughter, and we give everything back just to have her back.
Garnett Ace Bailey and Mark Bavis were scouts for the Los Angeles Kings hockey team, coming back for today's opening practice.
Ace Bailey and Mark Bavis, they're hockey people. They're professionals, and what they would both be saying is get the hell out there and get playing.
The jet forced into the Pentagon was American Airlines Flight 77. Chris Newton was on it, the young CEO of a Cypress, California company. He just moved his wife and 2 children to Virginia and was flying back for the family dog.
Being there, I think he was thinking that he was going to limit the amount of his flying that he was going to be doing so that he could spend more time with his family, and he felt that was a better place to raise his kids.
Barbara Olson, attorney, TV commentator, and the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson, made 2 brief calls to her husband from the plane, revealing the hijackers were armed with knives. Georgetown University professor Leslie Whittington was taking her husband and 2 young daughters on the trip of their lives. There was joy in her last voicemail.
My family and I are off in Australia, where we'll be until late November. We'll see you when we're back.
It was United Flight 93 that crashed in the Pennsylvania countryside. By all accounts, something heroic happened to steer it there. Passenger Tom Burnett, mourned at a memorial service in San Francisco last night, had telephoned his family from the doomed plane.
He said that a group of them were getting ready to do something, and then he hung up and he never called back.
31-year-old Mark Bingham called too. His mother wants to think he was also a hero.
Perhaps the passengers were able to thwart these people in some way.
They were among the very first victims of Tuesday's terror, and yet different from the still countless victims on the ground. Different because they knew of the horror to come. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
As for the men who committed these despicable crimes, the more we learn about them, the more they sound like villains concocted by a paranoid conspiracy theorist. They were nothing of the kind. My 60 Minutes colleague, correspondent Ed Bradley, has been digging into that. Ed?
Dan, yesterday 4 different groups of terrorists arrived at airports in Boston, Washington, and Newark almost simultaneously. Each hijacked a commercial jetliner, and in 3 of those cases made pinpoint strikes at their intended targets. It was, by all appearances, a stunning exhibition of planning and execution.
The scope and success of the coordinated assaults are frightening indicators to some experts that we are seeing a new breed of terrorists. There was an organization that was big, that was capable, that was organized, that was sophisticated, and it was operating right under our nose, and we didn't see it.
Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit.
The U.S. Attorney General confirmed that assessment today when he revealed that at least some of the terrorists received flight training here in the U.S.
A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
This is not the riffraff.
Judith Miller has studied Islamic terrorism for 20 years and sees in this disaster the signature of Osama bin Laden or some of the scores of aspiring terrorists he's trained.
Literally thousands of well-educated people who are sent to countries like ours and to Europe to act as sleeper agents who lie in wait for their moment of activation.
It's entirely possible, perhaps probable, that yesterday's attack had been in the works for years, following the pattern of the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in East Africa.
There was 5 years of preparation. People were sent to scout out targets 5 years before the U.S. embassies in Africa were blown up.
There's even a theory that yesterday's four-pronged attack was a collective act of different terrorist cells, each with no knowledge of what the others were doing.
So what they do is they build firewalls and to protect each particular cell, so that what happens is if any one of them are caught, then of course they can't say anything about any other part of the operation.
While the terrorist operation may have been sophisticated, what's not clear is whether it was expensive. At least one of the terrorists received flight training for just $10,000 in this country. And the possibility that all of this might have been done without a great deal of funding, Dan, that makes it all the more frightening.
Ed Bradley, thanks. And a New Yorker will tell you there was a strange sense of dislocation today, as if people living next to a mountain awakened one morning to find it had vanished. The majestic twin towers of the World Trade Center seemed to anchor the southern end of Manhattan like some vast rock formation. Yet tonight, they're gone. How could that happen? CBS's John Blackstone found out.
The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, destroyed yesterday, were once more than dominating features of the Manhattan skyline. They were symbols of achievement and success. From the observation decks on the top floors, tourists from around the world got their most memorable views of New York. When the World Trade Center was built in the 1960s, its soaring steel columns made it like nothing constructed before. Huge prefabricated sections were hoisted into position as the towers grew higher at an impressive pace.
In retrospect, would it have been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.
The innovative design was like a square donut. The strength was in the steel columns of the outer walls and the steel of the central core. At the beginning, the towers seemed incredibly stable, each apparently absorbing the impact of a Boeing 767 traveling at close to 500 miles an hour. The explosion of jet fuel that followed was the equivalent of a massive bomb, says physics professor Stephen Block.
The energy in a fully laden 767 is nearly equal to a kiloton of TNT being exploded. This is a staggering amount of energy, and it's equivalent, roughly speaking, to about a 20th of the energy that was deposited in the bomb that leveled Hiroshima.
But still, the towers stood. The blazing jet fuel, however, created fires burning hot enough to weaken the steel that held the World Trade Center high.
Wasn't the shaking? It was fire.
It was definitely the fire that took the building down.
As the fire burned on, experts say, temperatures rose above 1,000 degrees to the point where steel loses its strength.
Once it began to fail, it dragged in the floors and proceeded to pancake floor by floor so that the entire building collapsed, which was not necessary.
Architect Jim Malott says new standards for fireproofing and structural support may grow from this tragedy.
When you build something this big, it better not fail.
Engineers and architects say it's likely to be a long time before any more 100-story high-rises are built. In fact, across the country, almost every high-rise building seems suddenly more fragile and vulnerable. John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
Whatever shortcomings there may or may not have been in the design of the World Trade Center towers, there is no faulting the courage and dedication of New York City's firefighters. Jim Axelrod has the view from the front lines.
They are, in a word, speechless.
Excuse me, sir. What's it like in there?
Weary and weak, they emerge.
There's no training like a day like this. Never. Regular fires and everything you train, but nothing like this.
Knowing hundreds of their fellow rescue workers are missing.
The thing is that we don't even know how many are in there right now.
And probably dead.
I have 13 of my brothers unaccounted for from my particular firehouse alone.
These are the people who always run toward what others flee, and yesterday was no different. But today is, because so many of the unaccounted for are the officers who'd normally be calling the shots. Among them, the city's chief of special operations, a deputy commissioner, and a department chaplain.
I don't know what to say. We lost people that have given over 40 years.
So for now, the rescue workers in this city have to improvise the impossible.
Piece by piece. We get whatever command structure we have left, we put them together, and then they start a strategy.
Look behind me. Where do you begin? And how much more difficult when so many of the people who would normally answer that question are buried in that? Where do you begin? With rule number 1 of the rescue business. For every fallen hero, send 10 in his place. Where is Newport?
Newport, Rhode Island.
The help is coming from everywhere.
No, we didn't get the official phone call, but we just had to come.
Tell me real quick where you're from.
City of Passaic.
Right in the city of Passaic, New Jersey.
From Passaic in North Brunswick, New Jersey, Utica, New York, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Dexter, Michigan.
Drive down?
Drove. We just drove last night.
We just have to go in. We have to go in and get our brothers out.
Tonight, New York's fire department is disoriented and devastated, but not defeated.
We had people here last night, and we're here again today, and we'll be here tomorrow.
It's what always happens in catastrophes, even one that's never happened before.
Did you have pictures of your colleagues going through your head as you're in there?
Hasn't stopped since this happened. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm not leaving, and I'm not going home until every one of them are back with us.
Whether they're dead or alive.
Yep.
Tonight, there are reports of up to 7 firefighters rescued and rushed to hospitals. It's a strange feeling for those still searching. Friends are dead, commanders gone, and yet the backup keeps coming. Strangers who somehow feel like brothers. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
With us now is one of the thousands of brave people risking their lives in the rescue effort, Frank Rella. Mr. Rella is a paramedic. Thank you for joining us. Our admiration for what you're doing knows no bounds. How eerie is it to be working under these circumstances?
Well, sir, it's nothing that you could ever train for or you can ever anticipate. It's part of our lives. I mean, we go in there every day, we try to do the best we can for people, but it's nothing that you could ever anticipate happening.
What's the worst of it?
Worst of it is not being able to find patients or our brothers, our firefighters, or the police that have been lost. I mean, we're here to save people, and especially paramedics and EMTs. We're here to treat patients, and we can't find any patients.
How realistic is it to believe that at this late time there may still be people alive in the debris, Mr. Rilla?
Well, sir, I think it's the only thing that really can keep us going is just saying that there are people there, and we're going to get them out, and we're going to make sure that we'll stay here until it's done.
You do or do not have a sense of real and present danger as you're going about this work?
Well, I don't think we think about that. I think somebody being trapped is more important than us being afraid. I mean, anybody that doesn't fear is crazy, but we don't let that fear get to us. The people that are out there and still out there are going to go in there and at risk of their own personal safety, they'll do what they have to do. They'll do their jobs, and they'll do it well.
You say they'll do their jobs and do it well.
Yes, sir.
You'll do your jobs and you'll do it well. Frank
Well,
Rella,
sir.
paramedic, one of our heroes. Thank you. You're watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America.